Hello, I'm Wang Cong with the Global Times. I'm here in Beijing, where a massive and critically important summit just concluded, during which Chinese and African leaders draw the blueprint for China-African cooperation for years to come. The 2024 summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation was held in Beijing from September 4th to the 6th. The summit was the largest diplomatic event hosted by China in recent years. The leaders of China and more than 50 African countries, as well as the heads and representatives from African regional and international organizations, attended the event. In terms of outcomes, the summit was a very productive one, as Chinese and African leaders mapped out plans to boost cooperation in a wide range of areas, from agriculture to industrialization to green development. So what did the Beijing summit tell us about where China-African cooperation is headed, and why such cooperation will continue to flourish? For more on that, welcome to another edition of Decoding China. With all the major events at the summit, one small detail stood out: the presence of African coffee. In so many ways, this small detail signifies how China-Africa cooperation constantly evolves, upgrades, and succeeds. At the welcome banquet at the Great Hall of the People in downtown Beijing, a Chinese-made robot made coffee for guests using coffee beans from Africa, a perfect example of the strong economic complementarity between China and Africa. In many parts of Africa, growing coffee beans provide a much-needed livelihood, while China has a huge market for coffee. So in an effort to support the livelihoods of African farmers, China took a series of steps to increase imports of African coffee beans, including setting up a green channel for imports. African officials and businesses also took advantage of China's booming e-commerce sector to promote their coffee beans. And it has been a huge success. Back in 2020, Rwanda's ambassador to China participated in a live stream session and sold nearly 1.5 tons of coffee beans in just a few seconds, equivalent to the country's total coffee bean sales in the previous year. The story of African coffee beans in China is emblematic of an emerging trend in China-Africa cooperation: the surging exports of African agricultural products to China. China and African countries have long cooperated in agriculture, with China offering technological and other types of support for various agricultural sectors in Africa, which substantially increased yields. Greater yields mean more food for African families, and as Africa's agricultural sector is growing, many African countries are trying to export more to China. And what does China do? Well, make it much easier for such exports. In addition to opening green channels, China also waived tariffs on imports from many African countries. As a result, China's imports of agricultural products from Africa have achieved growth for 7 consecutive years, officials said. At the Beijing summit, China announced 10 partnership action plans which cover areas including trade. Specifically, China will waive tariffs on all previously taxable items from 33 least developed African countries that have diplomatic ties with China, which will also further boost agricultural exports. Agricultural cooperation was a top priority at the Beijing summit. Another major topic was green development, which also holds huge potential for cooperation. Energy shortages remain a challenge in Africa. More than 600 million people on the continent currently lack access to electricity, according to the International Energy Agency. Moreover, Africa's current energy supply continues to rely heavily on fossil fuels. However, Africa has plenty of hydro, solar, wind, and other resources, which makes it a prime location for the development of clean energy. Meanwhile, China has advanced new energy technologies that could be of great help to Africa's green development. Over the years, China has implemented hundreds of projects to promote clean energy and green development on the continent. For example, the installed capacity of solar power plants built by Chinese companies has exceeded 1.5 gigawatts, according to media reports. At the Beijing summit, China announced that it will carry out 30 clean energy projects in Africa, among other steps to help boost Africa's green development. Coffee beans and green development are just two examples of the successful wide-ranging China-Africa cooperation, but they also show the underlying reason why China-Africa cooperation will continue to succeed, and that is the principle of China's policy towards Africa. The principle can be described in 4 phrases: sincerity, real results, amity, and good faith. As reflected in the cooperation on African coffee beans and green development, China treats African friends with sincerity, genuinely cares about what they need, cooperates with them to achieve real results, and addresses many emerging issues with good faith. China closely combines Africa's independent and sustainable development with its own development, and rejects the zero-sum game and actions driven by a narrow pursuit of profit. China's ultimate goal is to realize win-win cooperation. That is the key ingredient for the success of China-African cooperation, one that will not only continue to underpin future China-Africa cooperation, but also cooperation in the global south. That's all for this edition of Decoding China. We'll see you very soon.